Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to Heraclitus e-learning. In last video, I have already shown you how to develop the detailed schedule with the top-down technique. In this video, I'm going to show you how to establish the constraint and the deadline in schedule. This tutorial will divide it into two videos. This is the first video. Here I'm going to show you how to establish the constraint and deadline. Constraint is very important in the schedule development. Constraints affect the total float calculation and affect the critical path calculation. Setting a deadline date in project provides you with a visual reminder if you don't complete a task by the deadline date that you established. Constraint as soon as possible. By default, when you add new task, Microsoft Project sets as soon as possible constraint to new added tasks. When you select as soon as possible constraint to the task, the date is calculated on the duration and the logic relationship with other tasks. So mostly, we will use as soon as possible constraint to the tasks. Constraint as late as possible. It can be used for procurement delivery as example, if its successor's total float is 0. This constraint forces a task to start just prior to its successor and make total float of its successor become 0. I like to show you the example. I have insert a new task 58. Click task name, write in delivery of installation. Click Constraint, type down arrow, select as late as possible. Please notice that the total float of 59 is 0, so that new added task 58 with the constraint as late as possible will not affect the task 58. Now, you can see total float of task 58 with the constraint is 0, as I stated right now. The date is 2nd June. The new added task with the constraint did not impact the task 59 of place wall installation in the first floor. But if I remove the constraint in the new task, please notice what will happen. Click Constraint Type of Task 58 and change to as soon as possible. The date changed to 3 January. This date is much earlier than the start date of installation. Now, I want to deliver material just prior to the task 16. Selecting constraint as late as possible. to task 58. Click task 58. In the lower pane, click ID of the successor. Change 59 to 60. You can see the total float of task 60 is changed to 0. And the date also changed from 3 January to 12 July. It's a big change. Also, the date of task 58 is changed follow the task 60. That's why I do not advise you use constraint as late as possible if its successor have a positive total float. Constraint finish no earlier than. It can be used for owner-supplier equipment. As example, here is the simple schedule for the constraint finish no earlier than application. The subsequent tasks of task 1 is planned based on the task 1 owner-supply equipment delivery contractual date. Even if it is probably delivered to the site earlier than the contract date, I still use the contract date since I organize the resource based on the contractual date. But if it is later than contractual date, it will affect the start of installation. I will claim to the owner for the resource idle. The feature of this constraint is if the finish date of the predecessor is earlier than the constraint date, the total float will display positive value. Here, if the client wants to make 5 working days as time reservation, I just want to make the total float of task 1 as 5 working days. In the contract, it is mentioned that owner-supplier equipment will be shown up on the site on 28 July. I set a constraint on task 2 with a finish no earlier than. Manufacturing finish will be 21st July. Earlier than contract date, 28 July. So there is total float 5 days. This total float can be taken as time reservation. But task 2 is still on 28 July, same as constraint date. If I change the duration of task 1 from 25 to 35, the finish date of task 1 is changed from 21st July to 4 August. It is later than the constraint date of task 2. The task 2 finish date is changed now. It is decided by the auto schedule calculation, but total float changed to 0. It means if finish date of task 1, the predecessor of task 2, is later than the constraint date on task 2, the finish date of task 1 drives the finish date of task 2 forward. Finish date of task 2 result from calculation of auto schedule. Constraint finish no later than. It can be used to contractual milestone. Here is the simple schedule for the constraint finish no later than. The feature of this constraint is if the finish date of the predecessor is later than the constraint date, the total float will be negative. It will remind you the forecast date of the contractual milestone will be later than the contractual date. There is a milestone with the name of installation completion, task 4. The contract requires the installation completion date is 8 September. It means the contractual date is 8 September. But due to the weather, the installation takes 35 days. You can see task 3 did not drive the task 4, but there is the negative total float 5 days. It means the forecast date of contractual milestone is 5 working days behind the constraint date. Therefore, when the total float of the task with this constraint is 0, don't trust the date. It is just the constraint date. I like to take another scenario. The installation duration will be reduced to 25 days. Click the duration of task 3. Change the duration from 35 days to 25 days. Total float is become 0. And the milestone date is calculated by auto schedule to 1st September, which is earlier than the constraint date. It means if the calculated date is earlier than the constraint date, the date of task constraint will be calculated by auto schedule. But total float will be not working. Don't trust the total float value if total float is 0 when we use the constraint finish no later than. Constraint must finish on. This constraint forces task to finish on the specific date. This milestone will be used for contract completion date. Here is a simple schedule for the application of constraint must finish on. Whatever its predecessor date change, it will not affect the date of this constraint when we use this constraint. Click Constraint type of Task 4. Select Must Finish On. Click Constraint date of Task 4. Select the date of 8 September. Click the duration of Task 3. Change the duration from 30 days to 25 days. You can see the finish date of Task 3, predecessor of Task 4, is 1st September. But the finish date Task 4 still keep on 8 September. But the total float is 5 days. It tells you that the installation will complete 5 working days earlier than the constraint date. If I change the duration of task 3 to 35 days, click the duration of task 3, change duration from 25 to 35. You can see the finish date of task 3, predecessor of task 4, is 15 September. but the finish date of task 4 still keep on 8 September. But the total float is negative 5 days. It tells you that the installation will complete 5 working days behind the constraint date. This is the good feature of the constraint. When the total float is showing positive value, it tells you that the forecast date of the installation is earlier than the contractual date. When the total float is showing negative value, it tells you the forecast date of the installation completion will be later than the contractual date. The only problem is the date of contract milestone will be anchored on the constraint date. There is one solution to solve this problem. Click the task 4 and right-click on it. Click Insert Task. Click Task Name and change the name to Calculated Date of Installation Completion. In lower pane, click ID of predecessor, write in 3. Click ID of successor, write in 5. Click the separate pane, then you can see the date of task 4 is calculated date reflecting forecast date by auto schedule calculation. Negative total float also tells you this forecast date is behind the schedule. This is the end of this tutorial. I hope you like it. Thank you for watching this video. If you like it, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Please also visit my other tutorials regarding to Microsoft project. See you next time.